When I saw my own face on a memorial program, I realized my daughter had done something I could never forgive. She told everyone I was dead, even held a funeral without a body. But she didn't know one thing: I was still breathing and watching. I stayed silent for almost a year, waiting for the perfect day to walk back into her life. That day turned out to be her wedding day. And when I opened those church doors, the entire room gasped, including the daughter who had buried me alive in everyone's memory. This is the story of how I died in her world and came back to destroy her perfect one. When people lose a spouse, they tell you the silence is what hurts most. They don't mention how loud that silence can be. The hum of the refrigerator, the clock that won't stop ticking because the person who used to talk through dinner isn't there anymore. That was my life after David passed. I filled my days with habits: morning coffee in his old mug, folding laundry that wasn't dirty, answering messages that no one had sent. My daughter, Samantha, called often at first. Matt. You need to get out, Mom, she'd say. She meant well, I think. But every visit felt shorter, every phone call more rushed. She was building a different kind of life: high heels, client dinners, social posts with perfect smiles. I was proud of her, truly. Yet every time I saw her, I felt a little less seen. Then one spring morning, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope from a hospital across town. Inside was a letter that began, "We regret to inform the family of Evelyn Carter." I reread that line 5 times before I could breathe. It wasn't a scam. The letterhead was real. The phone number matched. They were informing my next of kin, my daughter, about my supposed death. At first, I thought it was a clerical error. Hospitals lose records all the time. But when I called the number, the woman on the line grew quiet. "Ma'am, this call is being recorded. You're claiming to be Evelyn Carter." "Yes," I said. She hesitated. "Our records list you as deceased. The file was certified 2 weeks ago." The room spun. I hung up and called Samantha. She didn't answer. An hour later, she finally called back. "Mom." "Oh my God, you scared me. Samantha, what is going on? I just got a letter saying I'm dead." There was a pause. Then she laughed, that nervous, practiced laugh she used in meetings. "Oh, that. It's complicated, Mom. There was a mix-up with some paperwork. I'm fixing it, don't worry." Her tone was smooth, but something in it made my stomach twist. That night, I drove to her condo unannounced. Her car was in the driveway, the lights on. Through the window, I saw white flowers, candles, framed photos of me and her father, and a stack of glossy memorial pamphlets. Each one had my picture under a heading that read, "In loving memory of Evelyn Carter, 1967-2024. My legs nearly gave out. Samantha walked in from the kitchen holding a glass of wine. "And is Evan—" When she saw me, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Mom," she whispered, setting the glass down. "You weren't supposed to." "Supposed to what?" I asked. "Walk into my own funeral planning," she tried to explain. Something about a mistake, an insurance mix-up, a story she told her fiancé's family that got out of hand. But there were boxes of sympathy cards, emails printed out, and a list of donations in my memory. You don't print sympathy cards for a misunderstanding. I left without yelling. I just took one of those pamphlets and walked out. The night air felt colder than winter. For days, I sat at my kitchen table staring at that piece of paper, wondering how far she had gone. Then a friend from church called, crying. "I just heard the news," she said. "Your daughter's speech at the memorial was beautiful. She said you'd finally found peace." That's when I knew it wasn't an accident. She had told everyone I was gone. She had stood in front of people I loved and lied. Maybe it was money, maybe shame, maybe both. But whatever her reason, she had buried me without a coffin. And while the world went on believing I was dead, something in me did die. The part that still believed my daughter would never betray me, the part that remained, began to plan what came next. When the people you love decide you're gone, it's strange how quickly the world agrees. Within a week, my phone stopped ringing. My church group posted a message online thanking Samantha for sharing her mother's beautiful memories. My neighbor brought over a casserole and left it at the door, never realizing I was the one who opened it. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't felt like my life had been stolen. I didn't call anyone. I didn't correct them. Instead, I packed a small suitcase, just enough for a few days, and drove to a motel 2 towns over. I told myself I needed time to think, to calm down, to decide if I was ready to confront Samantha publicly. But deep down, I knew I wasn't ready to see the disbelief in people's faces when I said, "I'm alive." The motel was small, the kind where the ice machine hums louder than the guests. I paid cash. I bought a prepaid phone. For the first time in my life, I didn't exist on paper, no address, no ID, no one expecting me anywhere. It was terrifying. And freeing. And freeing. The first thing I did was look at the pamphlet again. Her fiancé's name, Daniel Hayes, was printed under special thanks. And at the bottom, donations made in Evelyn Carter's memory will support the Carter Memorial Fund. I didn't remember starting any fund. I called the bank listed on the donation line, pretending to be Evelyn's sister. The woman on the other end said sweetly, "Oh yes, that's under Samantha Hayes. Such a beautiful gesture." Hayes. She had already taken his last name. I hung up and stared at the motel ceiling for a long time. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a lie told to impress her future in-laws. This was calculated. She needed me gone legally. That's when I called Grace, my old colleague from the hospital. She was the one person who might actually believe me. "Grace, it's me," I said when she answered. There was a pause. "Evelyn, Lord, I just sent flowers to your funeral." I told her everything, the letter, the pamphlet, Samantha's reaction. Grace listened quietly. When I finished, she said, "Honey, you can't just walk into the police station and say, 'I'm supposed to be dead.' They'll think you're delusional. You need proof." She was right. Proof. Over the next few days, we started gathering pieces. Grace checked the hospital system. Someone had logged in under my old employee ID to access my records, a restricted area. Someone had requested a death certificate using a doctor's name I recognized, a man who had retired 3 years earlier. Samantha didn't do this alone. Grace helped me print the records. She used her husband's office copier late at night. I met her in a grocery store parking lot to pick them up. We hugged, and for a second I felt human again. "Be careful," she whispered. She's smart. And if she's done this much, she's desperate. That word, desperate, stuck with me. For weeks, I lived in that motel, watching Samantha's life unfold online. Photos of brunches, charity galas, the rehearsal dinner, invite all under her new name, Samantha Hayes. Every caption sounded like a fairy tale, new beginnings, love after loss. She had used my death to make herself more lovable. One night, curiosity won. I drove past her new house. Through the window, I saw Daniel and Samantha at the dinner table, laughing with his parents. On the wall behind them was a framed photo from my old living room, David's and my wedding picture. She'd taken it, hung it like it was her family's history. That hurt more than anything. I wanted to march up, ring the bell, make a scene, but Grace's words replayed in my head. "You need proof." So I did what I'd always been good at, observing quietly. I noted every bank transaction, every new item she posted online, every person she mentioned. I learned which florist delivered to her house and which law firm handled Daniel's trust funds. Then I noticed something odd. Her wedding was scheduled for the same week my will was set to release benefits to her, a detail only family would know. The date wasn't a coincidence. That was when the anger turned into focus. I decided not to confront her before the wedding. If she wanted the world to believe I was gone, then I'd give her the gift she wanted, silence. And then, when every camera was pointed her way, when every person she wanted to impress was watching, I'd give her something she'd never forget. Not rage, not violence. Just the truth, delivered in front of everyone who mattered to her. Until then, I stayed hidden. Grace brought me groceries once a week. I started writing down every event, every document, every inconsistency. I built a small binder, my proof of life. Some nights I'd wake up thinking maybe I should forgive her, that maybe there was a reason beyond greed. But then I'd remember the photo, the laughter, and the message from a stranger online who wrote, "Your daughter spoke so beautifully about you. Heaven must be lucky to have such a kind soul." That's when I knew forgiveness was not the ending of this story. The truth was, and the day to tell it was already marked, June the 14th, her wedding day. The motel room had started to smell like instant coffee and old air. I'd been there long enough to memorize the stains on the wallpaper and the sound of every car that passed after midnight. Living in hiding is strange. You start counting your days by receipts, not calendars. Grace brought me breakfast one morning and a folded envelope. "You need to meet someone," she said, sliding it across the table. Inside was a business card. "Detective Laura Bennett, Private Investigations." "She's not police," Grace explained. "She used to work fraud cases before she went private. If anyone can help you, it's her." I hesitated. A detective meant exposure, but it also meant answers. 2 days later, I met Laura at a quiet cafe off the highway. She was mid-40s, composed, with the kind of calm eyes that made you tell the truth without realizing it. When I finished explaining everything, the hospital letter, the death certificate, the donations, she didn't look shocked. "People fake deaths all the time," she said, stirring her coffee. "Usually to hide from debt collectors, not to bury their mothers." Her directness stung, but I appreciated it. She opened a small notebook. "Here's what we'll need: a copy of your real ID, your social security card if you still have it, the fake death certificate, and any signature samples from your daughter. We'll trace who filed the paperwork and how she got access." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control. I returned to my old house at night. My house, though on paper it now belonged to the estate of Evelyn Carter. Used a 10. I used the spare key I'd hidden years ago behind the porch light. The smell of lemon cleaner hit me first. Someone had been there. Probably Samantha, tidying the past. I went through the drawers quietly, pulling out my passport, tax forms, and the old file folder where David and I kept our insurance papers. My name was still there, active policyholder. If I was dead, the file hadn't caught up yet. I met Laura again 2 days later. She'd already found something. The signature on the death certificate came from an online notary system, she said, flipping open a manila folder. Whoever did it used a hospital ID number that belongs to Dr. Phillips. Retired 3 years ago. "Your daughter couldn't have done that alone." "Daniel," I said quietly. "Her fiancé works with tech firms. He could have helped." Laura nodded. "We'll keep that open. But if you want to expose them, you need the right stage." Her words stayed with me. The right stage. A week later, the wedding invitation went live online. Grace saw it first and sent me the link. It was beautiful. Gold trim, cream background. "Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Hayes invite you to celebrate their marriage to Samantha Carter, daughter of the late Evelyn and David Carter." Late. The word burned more than I expected. That night, I drove to a print shop and made 10 color copies of that invitation. On each one, I wrote in neat block letters, "The late Evelyn Carter requests the honor of attending." It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. If Samantha wanted to live a lie, she would have to face the truth on her own stage. Laura worked quietly in the background. She traced the donation fund. The bank records showed large transfers into Samantha's personal account. She also found that Daniel's parents had contributed thousands of dollars, believing they were supporting a memorial scholarship. That detail hurt them more than money ever could. We decided not to go to the police yet. "You need undeniable proof," Laura said. "Paper trails, signatures, bank logs. If we go too early, she'll spin it as identity theft or mental breakdown." I agreed. So I kept building my file, every screenshot, every bank statement, every legal document with my forged signature. I put them in a binder, labeled simply, "For the Truth." The days leading up to the wedding were strangely quiet. Grace checked in daily. "You sure you're ready to do this?" she asked over the phone. "I've been ready since the day she buried me," I said. Still, part of me wavered. What if Daniel didn't know? What if she convinced herself it was justified? Maybe it started as one lie and grew until she couldn't stop. But every time I softened, I remembered the look in her eyes when I walked into that apartment. Not guilt, not fear, but annoyance. And as if I'd ruined her timing. A few nights before the ceremony, I stood outside the church where it would take place. Through the window, I saw decorators hanging white drapes and arranging flowers. My photo, my memorial photo, sat on a side table among framed pictures of Samantha and Daniel. She had turned my death into decor. That was the final push. The plan was simple. Laura would attend the wedding posing as a guest's assistant with a hidden camera. Grace would be in the crowd, ready to call the authorities once the evidence was revealed. And me. I would walk through those doors right after the vows. When the pastor asked if anyone objected, no yelling, no theatrics, just truth. In the mirror of that motel room, I barely recognized myself the morning of the ceremony. My hair had grown out, streaked with gray. My face looked tired but calm. I put on David's favorite blue, dressed the one I'd worn to Samantha's graduation. It felt right that it would also be the one I wore to her wedding. As I zipped the binder into my purse, I whispered to myself, "She wanted you dead. Now show her what the living can do." The morning of the wedding felt almost ordinary. The sky was clear, the air soft with that faint summer sweetness that always made me think of David. If anyone had looked at me walking down that street, binder tucked under my arm, they'd have thought I was just another mother headed to a Sunday service. The church sat on a small hill, white columns gleaming in the sunlight. Cars lined the driveway, polished and perfect. People smiled as they entered, holding little programs that said a new beginning, Daniel and Samantha. I stood across the street and watched them go in. Grace spotted me first. She walked over, her hands trembling slightly. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I do," I said. "It's the only way she'll stop." We went over the plan one last time. Detective Laura was already inside, disguised as a guest. As assistant, a small camera hidden in her lapel. Grace would sit near the back, phone ready, in case things turned dangerous. I waited until the music started, that gentle piano that sounds the same at every wedding. Through the open doors, I could see Samantha walking down the aisle, radiant in white, her hand looped through Daniel's arm. People turned, smiling, whispering. It looked perfect, almost holy. I waited until the pastor began to speak. "If anyone here knows of a reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, that's..." When I stepped through the doorway, for a second no one breathed. My heels clicked against the floor, a small sound that somehow filled the silence. Every head turned. Every whisper stopped. Samantha's bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Her face went pale, then flushed deep red. She took one small step back, as if the air itself had betrayed her. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. "You didn't think I'd miss your big day, did you?" Gasps rippled through the pews. Someone whispered, "That's her mother." I thought Daniel looked from me to Samantha, confusion spreading across his face. "What's going on?" he asked. Samantha opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just kept shaking her head, as if she could erase me by denying my existence. I walked slowly down the aisle. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. I stopped halfway and held up the folded pamphlet, in loving memory of Evelyn Carter. "You buried me before I was gone," I said. "You took my name, my home, my life. For what? To make yourself look good. To fit into someone else's idea of perfect." No one moved. Even the pastor froze mid-sentence. Daniel took a step forward. "Samantha, is this some kind of joke?" She turned toward him, desperate now. "Daniel, she's lying. She's sick. This isn't real." I reached into my purse and pulled out the binder. "Then maybe you can explain this." I opened it and handed the top page to him, a copy of my death certificate, signed with a forged signature. "This is what your fiancée filed. She made me legally dead." The room erupted in whispers. Margaret Hayes, Daniel's mother, stood up, her face drained of color. "My God, Samantha, tell me this isn't true." Samantha's voice broke. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. It started as a mistake. I just wanted them to see me differently." Her eyes met mine for the first time. "You were supposed to move on, Mom. I just needed what?" I interrupted quietly. "My death to make your life easier." She started crying, not the kind that comes from guilt, but the kind that comes from being caught. Daniel turned away, hand to his forehead. "You told me she'd died years ago," he said under his breath. "We donated to a fund in her name." Detective Laura stood up from the back pew. "That fund doesn't exist," she said, pulling out her badge. The bank confirmed it. "It's been transferred to Samantha's personal account." The crowd erupted again, gasps, murmurs, phones recording everything. Samantha fell to her knees, trembling. "Please, Mom, stop. Don't do this here." I looked down at her, the daughter I'd loved, the child I'd raised alone. "There was a time I would have done anything for you," I said quietly. "But this time, the truth doesn't stop for your comfort." Laura nodded toward Grace, who made the call to the authorities. Within minutes, 2 uniformed officers entered through the side door. They didn't need to drag her. She didn't fight. She just stared at the floor as they read her rights. When they let her out, she looked back once. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. I didn't answer, because the truth was she had, and nothing I could say would undo what she'd done. The pastor tried to regain order, but the wedding was over before it began. Guests whispered apologies, others left quietly. Daniel stood frozen near the altar, staring at the papers in his hand like they were written in another language. Margaret Hayes walked past me without a word. She didn't look angry, just embarrassed, the kind of shame that people like her never forget. Outside, the sun was still shining, but it felt different, softer, freer. Grace came up beside me and touched my shoulder. "You did it," she said. "I didn't want revenge," I said quietly. "I just wanted my name back," she smiled sadly. "You got that, Evelyn. And maybe a little justice, too." We walked down the hill together, past the cars, past the whispers, until the church was just another building behind us. I didn't look back. The days after the wedding felt heavier than I expected. You imagine that telling the truth will set you free, that once it's out in the open, the world will somehow feel lighter. But it doesn't. It just goes quiet. News spread faster than I could have imagined. Someone's phone recording had made its way. Online, a shaky video of me walking into the church, Samantha dropping her bouquet, and the officers escorting her away. By the next morning, it had a headline: "Woman returns from the dead to expose daughter at her own wedding." I didn't recognize the woman in the video. She looked calm, almost cold, a stranger wearing my face. Detective Laura handled most of the chaos. She made sure the right evidence got to the right hands. It turned out Samantha had filed the death certificate using fake credentials, with help from one of Daniel's former co-workers who'd been paid off to bypass verification systems. She'd forged my will, too. The updated one would have transferred everything I owned to her once the wedding took place. When they searched her home, they found folders labeled accounts and legal transfers. She had planned every detail. Daniel cooperated fully. He looked broken when I saw him later at the police station. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "She told me you passed away years ago. She said your illness was sudden." I believed him. His grief looked too new to be rehearsed. Samantha was charged with fraud and falsification of documents. She was out, on bail within days, thanks to Daniel's parents, but she avoided the press. The few times she did appear in court, she looked smaller somehow. The fire in her eyes gone, replaced by something hollow. People in town didn't know what to say to me. At the grocery store, someone whispered, "That's her, the woman who came back." They meant it kindly, but I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Grace stayed by my side through it all. She brought meals, helped with paperwork, and sat with me through long hours when the silence returned. One evening, as we packed up my motel room, she said, "You know, not many people get to watch their own funeral and their daughter's undoing." It wasn't meant as a joke, but we both laughed anyway. It felt good to hear the sound. I moved back into my old house the following week. It looked the same, but smelled different, like someone else's life had passed through it. I spent hours opening boxes, throwing away what wasn't mine, reclaiming what was. My wedding photo with David had been taken down from Samantha's wall and returned in a police evidence bag. I cleaned the frame and put it back in its rightful place. One night, I found a note tucked inside one of Samantha's old notebooks, written years ago when she was a teenager. It said, "One day I'll make Mom proud enough to stop worrying about me." I sat there for a long time, staring at the handwriting, the loops, the hope. Somewhere between that note and the woman she became, something broke. People asked if I planned to forgive her. Forgiveness is a word people love when they're not the ones who've been buried alive in memory. But the truth is, forgiveness isn't a gift you hand out like an award. It's a choice you make when the anger stops helping you survive. I didn't forgive her that week, or the next, but I stopped wishing her pain. That was enough for now. A month later, Detective Laura stopped by with updates. "She'll probably serve a short sentence," she said. "Most of her punishment will come from what she's lost. Reputation, trust, the life she built on lies." I nodded. "That's a heavy sentence in itself." Laura smiled softly. "You ever think about writing all this down?" "I already have," I said, pointing to the binder on my table, the same one labeled for the truth. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was the record of everything I'd survived. I started volunteering at the local women's shelter soon after. The first time I walked in, a young woman looked up and said, "Aren't you the lady from that video?" I almost turned around, but then she added, "I liked the way you stood up for yourself. Some of us never get that chance." I smiled. "You always have that chance," I told her. It just takes time to find the right moment. That night, I sat on my porch listening to the crickets. The air smelled of rain and lilac, David's favorite. I thought about Samantha somewhere out there, facing what she'd done. For the first time, I didn't feel hate. I just felt tired, but in a peaceful way, the kind of tired you feel when a long, painful chapter finally ends. People still talk about that wedding sometimes. They call it scandal, drama, tragedy. I don't correct them. Because for me, it wasn't about any of that. It was about truth, quiet, simple truth that had been buried under too many lies. When I finally lay down that night, I whispered to the empty room, "I'm alive." Not as a headline, not as a warning, just as a fact, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. I used to think survival meant staying alive. Now I know it's about learning to live again, even after the world writes you off as gone. Months passed after the trial. Life didn't return to normal. It built a new shape around the cracks. The whispers died down. The headlines faded. People stopped recognizing me at the grocery store, and that was good. I wanted silence, not the kind that hurts, but the kind that heals. Samantha went to prison for 18 months. Fraud, falsifying government documents, financial theft. They stacked just enough charges to make the lessons sink in. I didn't go to the sentencing. I'd already heard everything I needed to hear that day in the church. But I did send her one letter. Just one. It said, "You took my name to build your life. I took my pain to rebuild mine. I hope one day you find peace not through lies but through honesty." I didn't know if she'd read it, but I mailed it anyway. Because some words aren't meant for a reply. They're meant for release. Grace and I kept our ritual, coffee every Saturday morning. She'd tease me for using my notoriety for good. "You're a local legend now," she said once, laughing. I shook my head. "I'm just someone who came back to tell her story." "That's exactly why people listen," she replied. It started small, one interview for a community paper, then a podcast about elder fraud, then a few invitations to speak at women's groups. Each time I told my story, someone in the audience cried. Not because of the scandal, but because they saw themselves in the silence between my words. And somewhere along the way, I realized this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a story for anyone who'd ever been erased by family, by love, by life itself, and still found a way to come back. One night after a talk, a woman hugged me and whispered, "My son stopped speaking to me 5 years ago. You just gave me the courage to call him." That moment alone was worth everything I'd lost. I began recording short videos online, small reflections about truth, family, and second chances. Nothing fancy, just me at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, saying what I wish someone had told me back then. That love without honesty isn't love. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And that sometimes the most powerful comeback isn't revenge, it's peace. The comments started to pour in. People from all over wrote things like, "Your story changed the way I see forgiveness. I called my mom today because of you. You reminded me that it's never too late to reclaim your life." I never asked for followers, but they came anyway, not for spectacle, but for truth. One evening, as I sat watching the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about how full circle everything had become. The same light that used to fade behind David's favorite hill now painted my porch gold. The same woman who once hid in a motel, afraid and forgotten, now had strangers thanking her for reminding them how to live. Life has a way of rewriting us, even when we think our story's over. I wasn't supposed to have a new chapter, but here it was, steady and quiet, breathing under my own name again. People still ask me, what happened to Samantha? And I tell them the truth, she's still my daughter. Because no amount of betrayal can rewrite blood. But I also tell them something else, that love must have boundaries, and truth must have a voice. The last time I visited David, as grave, I brought one of those old memorial pamphlets, the one that said, "In loving memory of Evelyn Carter." I placed it beside the flowers and smiled. "I guess I'm still here," I whispered. And for the first time, it didn't sound like defiance. It sounded like gratitude. As I walked away, I looked up at the sky, that soft blue fading into gold, and thought about every person who had believed my story, who had listened, who had shared their own. We were all survivors of something. All of us, quietly returning from our own little deaths. If you're listening now, if you've ever felt erased or unseen, remember this. Your story isn't over until you decide it is. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand up and say, "I'm still here. If my story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Leave a comment, tell me what coming back means to you. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories, because sometimes the truth deserves to be heard.